This is Bear With Us podcast.
Well, can we add Gurrrl? I mean, we aren't all manly like you.
Okay. How's this? This is Bear With Us, girl.
No. More like Gurrrl, like a glitter bear.
This is Bear With Us, girl.
Perfect. This is Bear With Us, Girl, where we stir the honeypot with hot topics, body issues, the adult industry,
Fashion, news, pop culture, pup culture, and more.
from the bear perspective.
For and by the community.
I can barely stand it. Get it?
You're unbearable.
Award-winning. Where's our GLAAD award?
No awards here. Just
You never know.
shame.
Just shame. Never know. Have you ever had anybody from the adult industry that's like, no, I don't film with hairy people? Have you ever had that?
Yes, I have. I literally had it with a friend when I first started doing like my OnlyFans. I just asked him, I was like, hey, do you want to do a scene together? He's like, hey, no offense, I just don't find hairy people attractive. His exact words.
He knows your brand, right?
I'm like, you do know I'm standing in front of you. You could just say no, or I just can't film. You don't need to say, I think you're ugly, sir.
Yeah. Now, wait a minute, though. Would he be able to, on his grinder, say not into hairy guys? Why
oh my
that?
God, that was last episode.
No, but
Moving on.
Hmm.
Living in the past, I see. Clearly, you have a vendetta.
Because it's so important to me. Anyway, the show's brought to you by cybersocket.com, the ultimate resource for gay erotica, now newly designed after 25 years strong. Visit cybersocket.com for adult interviews, great blogs, and our podcast, and also their top 5 very popular column, which I happen to write. So go to cybersocket.com.
We are also excited to be a media partner for Bear World Magazine.
Right.
Bear World Magazine is now 9 years old and is the only lifestyle magazine celebrating the global bear community in all its glorious, diverse beauty. If you have not done so already, head to bearworldmag.com to check out the great berry content. And also sign up for the new Wolf Report, their new weekly newsletter packed with berry news and gossip.
It's so good.
Thank you.
So good.
Were you expecting bad?
No.
I can get a new co-host, just letting you know. I did it
I
before.
know you did. Oh, burn. Now, I have to say, you're very excited for our guest. You actually were invited to Dragula season premiere.
Yes, and it happened just last night, and our guest was there because she is also a winner of Dragula. We have Vander Von Odd.
Hello. Listen to that applause. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Vander Von Odd was born and raised in a small conservative border town where books in the horror section of the video rental store were her only escape. Empowered by anti-heroes, villains, witches, and monsters, Vander is most inspired by the dichotomy in these: good and evil, logic and superstition, masculine and feminine. Vander is a filmmaker and a drag artist who competed on season 1 of the Boulet Brothers Dragula and was crowned the show's first drag supermonster.
A pioneer.
And that first season 1 was interesting.
It was interesting to film.
That's definitely a reality show reality shows when they're just starting.
I mean, any pilot season is always interesting.
Yeah.
Because the budget's not there, the fan stuff is not there, and it's like, oh.
Yeah, and as a competitor going into it, there was no reference for what the show was. People going into it now, they know what they're getting into. I didn't know what the fuck I was getting into. By the way, can I cuss on here?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, lovely.
You are a season 1 winner, baby. You can do whatever you want. Now, how did you kind of get that casting call, and how did you know, how far to go with your looks?
Well, because this was season 1, and I think the Boulets just didn't want people to know about the show or that it was happening. They didn't want buzz happening around it until it was announced. So they reached out to people for casting, and I was a very last minute audition. I've heard rumors here and there that someone dropped out or something happened. I don't believe I was meant to be on this season, but I got called up by the Boulets. Well, they messaged me on Instagram, and they were like, hey, can we send you an NDA and talk to you about this project? So I sent the NDA, and I was like, sure. They sent me the information, and I was like, okay, I'm down. How long do I have to prepare? When do you start filming? And they were like, Friday. So I had days to get ready for the first challenge. And yeah, that's how it all came together. It was all very hush hush because they didn't want anyone to know about it.
And like, what were the first few days of filming? Were you like, what did I do? Or were you like excited about the competition at that point?
Oh, I was intimidated because I was like a fairly new queen. I mean, I had been on the scene for like maybe a year, but I had just been doing tip spots. I didn't have any paid gigs. I wasn't working any big parties. It was a lot of like going out, showing up, and every once in a while I'd have like a tip spot or something like that. And it was just really intimidating. Like I had never been in a like professional drag setting like as someone who was working, much less like competing. And I was also up against people who were like very established in the scene, people like Melissa B. Fierce. I hadn't even met her, but I just like her name was like a thing, like it was Melissa B. Fierce. So I was actually I was mortified the first few shoot days, like mortified.
Now, be honest, whenever you did it, did you in your mind think you would win, or were you just thinking, I'm going to try and just get at least halfway and like
my whole like episode when I was just like, as long as I don't go home first, I'll be fine. Like as long as this is the one, like my first goal, right? Yeah, it was almost like setting goals as the thing went on, because I didn't know how it was going to go down. Episode 1 was just like, I just want to get through this episode. If I go home second, fine, whatever. But I can't go home first. And then once we were wrapping the third episode, I was like taking off my makeup. We were in Death Valley. I was like exhausted and covered in fucking pig brains and all kinds of bullshit, and just
as
like
one does in drag,
one does in drag, right? Getting out of drag in like 140 fucking degree weather,
smelling wonderful.
Wonderful. Oh my god, the smell! It's flowers and unicorns. And I was getting out of drag, and that's when I had, I think the first. It was such a weird moment. I was just taking off my makeup, and I was like, oh bitch, you could actually get to the end. I could like kind of see the finish line for the first time, and that's when it kind of set in that it was like a possibility.
And I'm wondering if you not being, in the industry for a long time, or being kind of that working drag queen, it didn't put all those pressures or those limitations of like, oh, I performed and all that. It kind of was like, well, you didn't have those limitations on yourself, so you just took it all the way. So maybe it actually benefited.
Yeah, and I didn't have the expectations. Like people didn't know what to expect of me, So had I done good, had I done bad, I think people might have been sort of I don't know if the word is indifferent, but it wouldn't have been like, oh look, she did so bad, because people didn't know who I was.
Would you ever do a reality show over again?
I've considered it heavily.
Because isn't there a rumor that they're doing like a Dragula All Stars?
Oh, as far as Dragula, nah, I won that show. I'm not going back. Fuck that.
I haven't
like,
found. I don't need to go again.
Like when they said the thing about like
All Stars,
like
1 star.
Yeah, like
right
when they did the thing. I know like Drag Race did like an all winner season, and I was just like, oh, could you imagine like if you're a winner and you go home first on the all winners? I would die. I would die.
Yeah, you're the first loser.
First loser. I think I could do well, but it's just not. It's just not something I care to do. If I did reality television, I think it would have to be something else. Mm-hmm.
Now I know this season of Dragula, there's actually a RuPaul girl, right?
There is. It's,
yes.
Jade Jolie.
Yes, Jade Jolie is on this season. Yes.
So would you ever do Drag Race?
Oh, it's like an ever evolving. Like some days I think, oh yeah, I would do it, and then some days I think, oh fuck no. It's very mercurial for me, because like during the beginning of pandemic, like my career fell apart. Like I lost all. I wasn't work. Obviously, we all like everyone in nightlife. None of us were working. I lost all my savings, like trying to just keep up and pay rent and cover my bills while not having any income or anything. And I was like financially so devastated by it that I was like, fuck it, I'll do Drag Race. I don't give a fuck. I'll do Drag Race. I'll take out a loan. I'll do whatever I have to do to get on the show and just have that impulse and that exposure to get out of this. But now that I'm like starting to recover and I'm doing better, I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that. It's like desperation. Yeah. So I don't know. It's very mercurial. It just depends where I am in my life. But I would like to not have to do it. I feel like if I did it, it's out of like necessity, which sucks.
So you're working now.
Yes, finally. Albeit it's October, and October is always very busy. So I'm just like hoping this carries on into the future months. Obviously, it won't be as busy, but I'm just hoping that clubs are still booking and like booking performers out of state, because that's where the real money is, especially if you live in a big city like LA, New York, Chicago. Booking fees are pretty low if you're local. You really have to like venture out to good money.
We've talked about this before on your podcast about how, like, for me, booking fees, it's the Midwest, that is where all the money is.
Oh, there's good money in the Midwest, and there's good ass drag in the Midwest, and there are some great stages. My only beef with the Midwest, there are a few, I don't know if states or cities where they have really strict laws on nudity.
Yeah.
And like,
For you, that's hard.
I'm a naked bitch on stage. I love being naked, so I have a tough time in those states. But there's good money in the Midwest. Yeah.
Have you always been so in tune with your sexuality and that kind of confidence of showing your body? Obviously, your style, your presentation is very definite. It's very bold.
Thank you.
Was that is that something that kind of you've matured into, or was that around since you were a kid?
Oh, it was something I definitely matured into. I think it's like a celebration of all the things that I like was very ashamed of growing up. It's like a celebration of all the things that I wanted to express and experience and showcase and feel, and I just couldn't because of where I grew up, and I was young, and I grew up in a really small, like, conservative, like, farming town. Where'd
you grow up?
It's a lovely little place called Calexico, California. It's right on the
Never
border.
heard
Don't go. No, it's like it has its charm, but it is a really small farming, sort of city, like agricultural city, on the border of Mexico, south of California. Like, growing up, we didn't even have a mall. We had like the movie theater and like the video rental store, and that was about it. Like, we would go to Walmart for fun as teenagers.
Yep.
It was that kind of town.
Mm-hmm.
So I obviously I at the time didn't have the confidence to express myself really the way I wanted to. So my drag and even my presentation in the daytime is just a celebration of that.
Well, and I do know from your bio and obviously from season 1, horror has really been an inspiration for you. What were some of like the earliest films that you really responded to artistically, not just like, oh, I love that horror film, but like you started to see the art in that genre?
Ooh, I don't know if I started to see the art in it, but I always bring up this movie when I get asked this question because I think it was the first time that I was like captured by horror. And I don't know, I feel like there always I found some sort of like emotional or like personal connection to a lot of horror characters and stuff like that. But for me specifically, I remember I was about 2 or 3. It's funny. This is my first memory of being alive. Like, do you all have like your first memory where you're like,
Yep.
oh, this is the first thing I
Yep.
remember about
Yes.
being like a conscious living human
Yes.
being? Mine was I was like standing up in my crib holding onto the rail, and my parents were watching this really tacky horror comedy called Wicked Stepmother with Betty Davis and Barbara Carrera.
That was her last movie that she
was
made.
her last
In fact, she
movie.
didn't survive for the whole film, so they had to do some of the scenes. And I mean, that is so funny.
Yeah, and that was the first film I remember. And granted, it's like a cheesy horror, but
It's
as a
awful.
kid, you don't really recognize that. I just saw there was this like really old, ancient, glamorous woman who was like a witch, and at the end of it, they sort of like force her into like the body of a cat. And there's this scene where she like her daughter falls back. It's this whole thing where she and her daughter are witches, but only one of them has a physical body, so they have to share the body of a cat, and they switch in and out of it. And so at the end, they both get like forced into the body of the cat, and Barbara Carrera, who plays the daughter, falls back, and her head is like spinning amongst all these vines in the grass, and every time it spins, it's a different face. So it would spin, and it would be Betty Davis, and then it would be the cat, and then it would be her, and then it would be this horrible monster thing. And that's the first. I just have that memory so clear in my head of seeing that when I was like 2 or 3 and being like, oh my God, like.
It didn't scare you? It didn't traumatize you?
No, I don't know. I was.
I think
just like,
Walmart probably
more
traumatized her a little bit more
Where to
than
Walmart?
that.
Yeah, my hometown traumatized me way more than Betty Davis's head spinning round and round in circles. But yeah, I remember that. And then after that, I remember being really young and watching Species and how like sexually
watching that too.
charged that movie
Yeah.
was. This like woman, this coming of age, this sort of like blossoming sexuality, and she's this like beast, this like sort of monster that she can't control. So yeah, it was just horror was always there. However, I could find it.
Do you get scared easily?
I really, really don't. Most of the things that scare me are like real life things, like home intrusion scares me, like being assaulted
Rent.
on the street. Oh, Rent, horrifying,
Well,
horrifying.
That's your horror film.
Yeah.
Rent, dude.
Truly, yeah, just piercing screams. But as far as like horror films and stuff like that, no. I think when I'm watching it, things can definitely. I think you can like empathize with things. So you can like feel horrified for someone. You can feel like disgusted or terrified. But yeah, it's not like I don't go home and like. And some people like replay the movie in their head and they get really paranoid at home. That doesn't really happen for me.
So you can handle gore. Like if you saw in a movie like Saw, like somebody getting chopped off, you're not gonna like wince and look away.
No, I won't look away. I think I do have a bit of a sensibility for gore or violence when it's gratuitous or when it presents itself in a way like unfortunately a very common trope in horror films is like the killer tranny, right? The killer transsexual, transvestite, the murder, and it's funny, I saw this film called something in a Ghostland, Mystery in a Ghostland, or like, Incident in a Ghostland or something like that. And I was loving the movie until the villain, they reveal there's these two villain characters, this like big brutish guy and then this woman who sort of controls him, who is very clearly like a cis male actor in very like trans presenting drag. And I guess spoiler alert, but it's a terrible film. I really don't think anyone should watch it because at the end of the film the police like shoot her to death, and when she falls her wig falls off and she's bald. So it wasn't just like killing the trans woman, it's like, oh look, this is a man. It was like ripping her hair off, right? Like of course they had to rip her wig off and show you that she's bald underneath. So stuff like that, like the gore itself doesn't faze me. It's more so the way in which it's presented, because it's hard to watch like trans people getting killed on screen,
Well, like I'm sure you've heard of the film like Sleepaway Camp.
Like, yes,
that one's one of the the beginning of horror.
Oh, love Felissa Rose.
But did that old film, does that bother you?
For older films, I don't think it bothers me as much. It's troubling to see, but I feel like when you watch a lot of horror from that time period, it's just like those conversations weren't really as present as they are now. So it's one of those things where I kind of like. I enjoy it, understanding it for the time in which it was made, but I feel like now the resources are there and filmmakers don't really have an excuse to use those tropes.
Well, and also I think that there is, just like in science fiction, the horror film genre has had this boom of LGBTQ fans. They've always been there. We've always been fans, but now we're coming together and we're talking. And because we are more visible, the filmmakers are having to respond to that. We see there's a boom in LGBTQ characters in horror now. Especially Freaky was, the Blumhouse's last one with Vince Vaughn, and he switches bodies with a girl, and then he ends up kissing a boy. And Misha Osherovich is a non-binary actor that is very prominent in it. And Misha was telling me about what the efforts that Blumhouse is going through to have people in front of the camera and behind the camera telling these stories, where it's not part of the supernatural, vision. It's like it's part of the new horror family, that we all have a place at the table because the audiences are being more vocal about who they are.
I think horror also tends to be, or at least now, is very queer.
Yes.
And very queer friendly.
It's always been a little homoerotic. I mean, Johnny Depp
queer,
in Nightmare on Elm Street in those gray sweatpants.
I mean, horror so often is about or caters to what is like the other, and like queerness has always been othered. And I think it's easy for queer people to relate to anything that is, set aside as other, because we live in that sort of nebulous space where we just like aren't really understood by most people. So it's, I don't know, it's just easy to relate. I know I love Silence of the Lambs. I know Buffalo Bill is a very problematic character.
Very problematic.
But I have a Buffalo Bill number because I remember watching that scene and being so mesmerized, and when I perform that number, it's really hard to explain, but like just being like tucked and naked and like dancing to this song and living out this fantasy, it's like such a moment, because it does really take me back to being a kid and like wrapping a sheet around my waist and belting it and like just dance like privately in my room or like in the bathroom, putting on my mom's makeup and just living out this fantasy like away from other people, because I was made to feel like what I was doing was sick or disgusting. And Buffalo Bill is doing something that is like sick or disgusting, and he's doing it privately. He's just living out his fantasy, and I related to that. And so I understand the character is very problematic, but I also understand that like as a trans person, that sort of connected with me in a very distinct way, despite the problematic nature of the character.
Speaking of problematic, I know that you used to love performing to Marilyn Manson numbers.
I did, yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I guess trigger warning, first of all. There's a whole lot to unpack with Marilyn Manson. Growing up, I was a big, huge fan because of everything he represented. He really was like the antithesis to like conservative religious America, which was my like number one enemy growing up, right? So he was almost a sort of like a superhero. But even then, like I remember owning the Guns, God, and Government tour DVD and just seeing his antics backstage. There was you could kind of there was some toxicity there that was very obvious, right? But I think I was willing to look past it because of like what he meant to me, what he made me feel, the way his music made me feel so empowered. But once the like recent allegations dropped, yeah, I just couldn't. I had to like I had only about 2 Manson songs that I performed to, but I had to replace the songs, basically keep the number, replace the songs, and kind of adjust the numbers to not use his music. I know of a trans woman. Oh, her name is slipping me because we've only met a few times, but you know, she put out her testament of her experience with Manson when she was working in fashion, like as a dresser or something like that, and she had to go to Manson's house to dress the woman he was dating at the time for a video shoot or something, and like Manson put a gun to her head and as a joke pretended that he was going to shoot her and said that he didn't like, you know, something along the lines of like, I don't like faggots or something like that. That's really intense. Like, you don't hold a gun up to someone's head. So that for me was it's just you just can't go back from that.
But I remember Marilyn Manson when I was growing up. Believe it or not, I was a Marilyn Manson fan. You look at me like, wow, no. But I would go.
But so many of us were.
Well,
it was in the 90s. He was huge.
And I was in Catholic school, but then the boys would start playing with makeup because they saw Marilyn Manson was wearing makeup. And then he would talk about, you know, kind of gender bending in terms of sexual roles. He talked about giving another rock star a blowjob backstage once. And so these were kind of a figurehead talking about these themes that I had never heard before or talked about. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of, you know, like finding, like the Addams Family is a safe family for us because anything goes and you could be odd and still loved. And at first his message was kind of, that's like, be who you are.
It sounds like a gay icon the way you're describing now.
But he kind of was when he first started off. And I think celebrity, we talked about celebrity getting to other people's heads. And I think that totally, he started living in his own bubble. He kind of imploded on the idea of what his first mission was. Because, I mean, he didn't grow up, he grew up bullied and, you know, awkward, and now he's back to being awkward.
Yeah, that one's a tough one to tackle. I still occasionally hear the songs go on in the club when someone performs, but for the most part, I find that the vast majority of the drag community has kind of like X'd his music out of performance spaces.
Now, does it bother you? Because like this is the conversation that always happens a lot of taking the music and separating it from the artists. Because like there's artists like, you know, people still perform to Michael Jackson songs, and you know there's many problematic artists, or people still perform to like Dr. Luke songs. Like they'll do old Kesha songs. And how do you think is it like a personal choice to separate the artist from the art, or do you think everybody should just stop doing certain songs once somebody has done certain actions?
I mean, I think there are certain artists that definitely don't deserve to be platformed, but I don't know if that's for me to dictate who can or can't perform what artist. I think it is slightly more of a personal choice. It definitely speaks of someone's character when they do certain music by certain artists. I think that definitely is something I register in my mind if I hear someone performing to someone who is specifically very, very, say, like transphobic or homophobic or something. I do remember. Yeah. You know, I do remember who performs those songs. I may not go up to them and be like, you shouldn't perform this, but I remember. And I'm very careful about who I choose because I also don't want people in the audience to feel, say, like the way I feel when someone performs to someone who is very, very problematic. So, yeah, it's a personal choice. But with that personal choice, come the consequences. And I'm not someone who likes producing shows, but if I did produce shows and someone said like, "Oh, I'm doing the song," if it was my show, I would straight up be like, "No, you're not." Yeah.
But it kind of trickles down because then it talks about, is there like a time frame that it's acceptable, like Michael Jackson? It's like, oh, well, it's not really about him. It's about the music and how he changed the industry. But then it's like movies that were made by directors that we know have issues. Do we take those movies off the air? They're just the director, or they were just the actor, or,
I think it's hard because I don't it's both answers are correct. And that's the awkward part. Like, because there's a lot of things that you're just like, they have tainted things that are so good. I don't know. I'm one of those people that, like, once it's tainted for me, I just don't have an interest because I believe there's so much art, film, music out there that it's not that hard. Like, mourn it like the death of a loved one, and then go find someone else.
That's exactly what it was for me for Manson. It was kind of painful. It felt like divorcing this like person who had been such an important part of my upbringing, someone whose art had been like so personal to me. But like you said, there's more art out there in the world. There are plenty of more inspirational people, and
that aren't shitty.
Yeah.
I want to talk about Dragula a little bit. When it first came out, it was like, oh, this is the opposite of
anti-drag race.
Anti-drag race, and that's what it was supposed to be. And I didn't respond to it at first because it was so foreign to me. But then I started watching the show, and there was just this intrinsic like beauty to this kind of different kind of drag, and I think it opened the eyes to a lot of people that thought they knew what drag was. And it's like, no, drag is not drag race. Drag has been around for even in ancient times, and so it celebrates that art. But do you feel it is like the opposite of corporate drag or bubblegum drag? Is that what the point of Dragula is, or what do you think Dragula is at its core?
I don't think it's the opposite, because I think to say it's the opposite is to say that like drag is almost like binary, like there's glamour and then there's spooky, when really and the thing is there's a lot of glamour on Dragula as well. I don't think it's the opposite. I just think it's a different facet of drag. I think there are like, if this is so cheesy, if drag is a garden and there are many trees in the garden, Dragula is just one of those trees, and Drag Race is one of those trees. But there's so many, and Camp Wanakiki is its own tree.
Camp Wanakiki,
they all cater to different sort of sectors of the drag community, but I wouldn't really say it's like the opposite of Drag Race. Yeah.
I want to ask you, what did you think of the first episode of Dragula of the new season?
I thought it was phenomenal. I think it's one of the best first episodes they've had.
I have to say, from an outsider, and I've covered Dragula and I've covered Drag Race, I get that there's more of a sense of support for the Dragula cast members than, say, Drag Race. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, because you were actually like lived it behind the scenes.
What do you mean by that?
In terms of like, we want to support the other artists, and where Drag Race, now it's being edited and clipped so that they're attacking each other with one-liners and on social media, and it's kind of a war rather than supporting a whole.
I mean, I feel like that's what this season's going to be about. I was like, there's a lot of drama in the first episode.
But has it changed now to just become more popular, to be more drag race-ish, and now we're seeing more art in drag, more, I think, inspiration from like Dragula in Drag Race. It's like,
that's true.
I think I don't necessarily feel that it's because the thing is, both shows have some amount of drama, and some seasons have more than other.
And they have to make
it
a reality show.
I think that's a small part of it, but I think it's less about the drama. It's more about just the fan base that the show carries. Drag Race is hugely successful, which means it's in like television homes across America, and they know that I think Drag Race, their goal was to become that. So what do? You kind of cater to the common denominator, and that's, I'm pretty sure if you looked, I don't know this, but I'm assuming if you looked at statistically who are the largest viewers of Drag Race, it's probably like cis white women at home. You know what I mean?
Woo girls.
Exactly. So there are a lot of people who follow the show who don't necessarily know about drag or understand drag. There are a lot of people who follow Drag Race who are not queer, and I think maybe that's where a lot of the toxicity comes from, is that for a lot of those people watching the show, they're not watching artists. They're not watching people. They're watching like pawns in this game. So it's
like
a lot easier.
Real Housewives.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's a lot easier to sort of dehumanize them in that sense. I think that's why the Drag Race fandom can be so vicious and
Very
so
vicious.
horrible to those queens. Whereas, not to say that doesn't exist with Dragula, but I think it's way more reduced simply because the show, the majority of the fan base I think is queer. And I think queer people want to support queer artists. So you see a lot less of that toxicity.
Yeah, there's definitely like a fake war that I feel like it's more from the Drag Race fans that like are very Drag Race versus Dragula, where they're like, you like this one or you like this one.
Yeah.
Oh
And it can't, like,
yeah,
both. And it's very
it's very like Team Edward, Team Jacob.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
it's very that.
And we know it's Team Jacob. We know it all day long. It's Team Jacob. Do you mind sharing your coming out story or coming out stories?
Sure.
with
I
us?
mean,
especially coming from a very
I
small conservative town.
I think, oh God, I was just such a flaming faggot. I don't even know if there was really a coming out. There were, I mean, the official coming out, I did tell my parents, but they weren't shocked. I think they were a little bit taken aback, but I really don't think they were shocked to find out. They had already seen me like playing female characters in like haunted houses and theater and stuff like that. I think this is so cheesy, but I think the most of the coming out was really to myself and like figuring myself out, because I think everyone around me maybe didn't like know exactly who I was gonna be or what I was gonna be, but they could see it clear as day. They could see it. It was really more about me figuring out who the fuck I was and what I wanted out of life.
Are you famous in your hometown?
I don't think so. I would hardly say so. I think I'm like respected amongst like the queer people who are there and the small like community of drag artists that are there, but I would hardly say like people don't recognize me on this. These people who live in a farming community, they're not watching Dragula. They're not
That's
watching
true.
Dragula.
I think that's continually going to change, though, the bigger Dragula gets, and I think that the audience...
The farming communities get more approved of it?
Well, no, because it's going to get more mainstream, so they're going to see it like on Netflix now. It's a choice now that people can look at,
That's true.
and so it's more easily available to watch. So people that are interested, it pops up. If you like horror as a genre, it'll pop up as something that you might like, and so people will go back and watch season, just like people are starting to watch Drag Race because it was on VH1, and then now it's everywhere.
I just realized, another thing is I think a lot of people who saw the show don't realize I'm from there. So they wouldn't actually know that I'm from there. But I don't believe it's ever mentioned on season 1. So unless they like really follow me and like watch like these podcasts or the interviews I do, they wouldn't actually know I'm from Calexico or Mexicali. Yeah.
Do you feel like your fan base has changed a lot from like when you started? Because like you're big now. Like you are
It doesn't
famous.
feel that way, but thank you.
Well, I've been lucky enough. Like I've gotten to watch you grow. Like we've both watched each other grow.
Yeah.
And like it's very nice to see. Like I've watched you just become, in my eyes, like a star. And we were also talking about like earlier about certain drag queens that have personalities have changed when they become famous, and you are one of the few who has never changed. You've always just been genuine yourself.
Thank you. I think a lot of people... It's funny, I had this conversation recently with a friend. We were talking about, what's the worst part of you? And I was like, honestly, I think my ego. A lot of people don't realize. I think because I'm, like, so gentle about the way I approach things, people just assume that I don't have an ego, but I really do have one. I think the difference is just that I check it regularly, and I don't let myself act on my ego. But I think it also, part of it may have to do with how the show grew in popularity, as opposed to say someone on Drag Race who, as soon as you're announced, instantly famous. Like you're instantly famous, from one day to the next. Because I was on season 1, that didn't happen. The show came out, and it was there was like a local sort of like buzz around, like, oh my God, you're on this thing, But on the grander scale, people weren't rushing to my meet and greets. You know what I mean? That's something that slowly built up over time. And also my inception into the spotlight happened in a way where like I wasn't working before. I was trying so hard to work, and like I think a lot of people underestimated me. A lot of people didn't really want to throw me gigs. A lot of people kind of just kind of put me aside, sort of thing. And I could feel that. It was very apparent. And then as soon as I got on the show, everybody wants to be friends with you when you're on a TV show, you know, everybody. And it was just so clear and it was just so fake. And I think as shitty as it was, it helped me to always remind myself, like, be careful of people's intentions. Be careful about why they're so nice to you. Be aware of like why they're so kind or why they want to be your friend, all these things. So I'm very like careful about that. And I can also sense it like when I'm with friends, say, and I'm say someplace like DragCon where everyone knows who I am. I can very clearly see how people at booths treat me versus how they treat the people I'm with. You know what I mean? When they don't realize I'm with those people, it's a very distinct. So that is like I don't know. It's like a reminder that not to let it get to my head because it's all very superficial.
To stay humble, to realize at the end of the day, you're like, we're not saving lives here.
No, bitch, I'm slapping on a wig and you know twirling.
Well,
maybe not twirling.
But yes and no. I mean, you look at your social media presence and you see what a voice you have for that kid in a small town, and then whether you want it or not, you're kind of made a spokesperson for the LGBTQ community by being on the show. So that's kind of forced on you whether you want it or not. I want to ask you a question about labels because I'm very heated about talking about labels. How would you label yourself, or do you think that we even need labels, or is it something that we should just stop trying to affix ourselves to?
I think labels are great when they are self-assigned because I think they help people find a place where they sort of feel they belong or people they can relate to. But in the same vein, there are people who feel who have a lot of anxiety around labels and things like that. So for me, labels are great if they're self-assigned. If it's something you're able to give yourself a sense of like belonging, community, or understanding for other people as well. Sometimes labels aren't just for you. Labels are for other people to understand where you're coming from. So for me, like I'm trans feminine. I've always felt like I'm on the threshold of like potentially having been like a trans woman, but not quite there. I'm like just at the threshold. So a lot of people assume that I'm like non-binary, and they say that, and I guess technically by definition you could say I'm non-binary, but the reason I have never really liked that specific identity is because when people think non-binary, they conjure this image of like half man, half woman sort of thing, and that's not really where. And I know that's not what non-binary is, but that's what other people prescribe to me. So to sort of separate myself from that, I say trans feminine, and that I feel like very specifically assigns my identity to femininity and like feminine presentation and gender presentation. So that's a label that I love for myself, but I'm not going to tell someone else that, you know, if you are just like me, that's what you have to identify with, you know?
So the conversation I've had before, and Teddy, I would love your opinion on this as well, is, you know, we've just come out of a really rough time with administration, socially, politically, what have you. And we see a lot of members from our community really like Lil Nas X, right? Mm-hmm. He's exploring his sexuality in such a big way, really in our face. And I think there's members of our community that are so affixed to our letter or our labels, and it's like, you know, really blowing up or getting very angry. And it's like, should we be more concerned about trying to reopen lines of communication with mainstream America? Are they ready for these conversations, or these, like Lil Nas, his over sexuality, or the ideas of all of these different letters to our alphabet and self-identities? You know, I couldn't even write them all down for you in 10 minutes.
Well, I mean, the thing I wanted to say this, Lil Nas is not overly sexual. That's the issue, is that we've just been so undersexual in queer music or representation in front of straight people. The second you see what a straight person has been literally doing for decades, we think it's overly sexual.
Totally agree, but we're not there yet as a community. So, like, if I just came out, and I'm just using this as an example, if I just came out to my grandma and she's watching TV and that's her idea of what a gay man is, that's a different conversation than her spending time with me and meeting somebody I'm dating. It's a whole different impression of what being gay means.
Yeah, but what are you saying? Are you trying to say that like everybody has to be the perfect image of gay just so that like grandmas can understand it?
What I'm saying is that mainstream America that we've fought for the last 4 years is part of that older conservative group. And I'm not saying that we all need to be on our best behavior, but do we all need to, you know, be half naked and like
I think we do.
But I love this conversation.
And this is why
I do love
we
this
have you.
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I think that if we wait for like general America to be ready for the full-blown capacity of queer people, we're never going to do it. Like, they will never be ready. That's the thing. You have to make people uncomfortable. I love making people uncomfortable. I love making people in my family I love making my parents uncomfortable.
Yes.
And my parents were those people who were very uncomfortable about those things, and now they're so chill about it. And it's because I've sort of like been like, here, look at that, like, look at this,
like opening up their eyes, look at it,
yeah,
look at it.
Yeah, like going to a Sasha Colby show and being like, look at her, like very that. So but at the same time, I get what you're saying. Do people take these like very generalized misconceptions of queer people? You know what I find? They're gonna find that somewhere. If it's not Lil Nas X, they're gonna find it somebody else. So I think what Lil Nas X is doing is fucking great.
Are your parents conservative?
No, they're not conservative. I think they just grew up in a very conservative place. And so a lot of the way in which they navigated life and the way they perceived other people and, just human beings by large was heavily influenced by where they grew up. I think I definitely shook them up, even because since I was a baby. It was so painfully obvious. So I kind of shook up that world. But at the same time, I know that if I had been, say, like if any other of my uncles had been my dad, I would have been fucked. Like, I would have been fucked. I got lucky with my dad because my dad is so chill and he's so kind. And he's like, growing up, he was very nurturing. And like, every time he came home, I had to give him a kiss on the cheek. And it was very that, So he was very, very different from other men in the town where I grew up.
The ones that would be like, I can't kiss you because I'm a man.
Oh, I had experiences like that where, because it's funny, I had this really uncomfortable experience when I was maybe like 6 or 7, where I was so used to, when I would get home, my dad would be like, and my dad's Chinese Mexican, and his dad was full Chinese, and he didn't know a lot of Chinese, but he knew some. And I think that's maybe where his nurturing side was that my grandpa was nurturing. So every time my grandpa would get home when my dad was a kid, he would be like, oh, give me a tutui, which means like kiss. So my dad would have to give my grandpa a kiss. And so then my dad did that with me, where every time I would get home, or he would get home from work, he would be like, dame un tutui, and I would have to give him a kiss on the cheek. And I was so used to that, just like very innocent affection with my dad, that was just like a way of saying like, oh, I love you, I'm glad you're home. One time when I went to my grandma's house, I went to just go kiss one of my uncles on the cheek because I hadn't seen him in a long time, and he put his hand on my chest. Like, I went in and he put his hand on my chest and like pushed me back gently, just like nudged me back. And I remember being like, oh, this isn't a norm. This isn't a thing most people, this isn't like okay. This isn't like an okay thing for most men, right? So my dad was very, very special in that sense.
I just have to say, I want to ask, what's it like dating Vander? I see the look on social media. I saw you in Dragula. I'd be very intimidated to even know like what to wear on a first date.
It's just as intimidating as you think. I'm kidding. No, it's,
no,
it's
I love
really
that.
and you're also dating a bear.
Oh yeah, my boy Alexi, yeah, my puppy. Yeah, it's funny. You would think I'm very like, I am slightly height maintenance. I wouldn't say height maintenance, but I love dressing. I love dressing up. I will dress up to go to the grocery store.
Somebody who wears a headdress is high maintenance?
Oh yeah.
No.
Usually, I almost never wear makeup in the daytime, and I have a shaved head, so really, I just shower and I get dressed, so I can be quick. But I am very like I like to dress up. But like my previous partner, he was always like a gym shorts and flip flops kind of guy, and I would just be with him in his gym shorts and flip flop. I wouldn't expect him to dress up because that was my thing. But Alexi loves to dress up too, or dress really nicely, and he also works for like a tactile like kind of higher end men's brand. So he's like very knowledgeable about like fabrics and like garment construction and things like that. So we have that sort of fun where we kind of dress up together. But I never expected of my partners or anything like that.
How big, like, is your closet space? Are you always fighting for closet space?
Wow, currently, in my current situation, I have like double sliding doors packed, And then I have half of a second, because I live in a 3-bedroom that I share with a roommate, and we share the 3rd bedroom as like a sewing room. So we split that closet, and my side of the closet packed. And on top of that, I have a rolling rack in my bedroom packed. And I have a second rolling rack on the way because I'm out of space.
So are you a hoarder? Is that what you're basically coming out telling us?
I wear everything. So I guess
Everything.
by technically, no, because I do wear everything. If I don't wear something for a long time, I get rid of it.
Okay, I was about to say, like, wearing it once doesn't mean you wear everything.
No, but I do like options. And I love separates is the thing. And separates take up a lot of room.
But it's always that idea. It's like, someday I might need this, you know, it's like when we pack anywhere, we're packing, you know, 6 pairs of underwear when we're gone
I'm
for 2 days.
horrible at packing.
Me
I'm
too.
horrible. I'm that bitch that shows up to the airport with like 4 suitcases.
Because you never know what's going to happen.
You never know. And then especially now that the weather's changing, I have to dress for the heat. I have to dress for the cold. It's a mess. God, but I love clothes. I love dressing up.
Are you traveling to any gigs coming up?
Ooh, I think I'm doing New York City. I don't know if this weekend or the next. I have like a 5-city tour at the end of the month. It's like Lafayette, Texas, Austin, San Diego, and I think I'm missing 1 or 2 more. So yeah, October's been good to me for sure.
You're busy again. That's good to hear.
Yeah. I've been working with Luther Tostin of Omni Talent Group, and he's been getting me gigs. So very happy.
What do your fans tell you the most or ask you the most?
Ask me the most. Ooh, what do they ask me the most? You know, it's funny. A lot of fans don't really have questions. Oftentimes, they're just really excited to share the ways in which drag has influenced their lives or inspired their lives. So I get a lot of cool stories from people. I don't get a whole lot of questions. I feel like from interviews, I've enjoyed this because y'all haven't asked a lot of the same questions I get asked all the time. It's like, what's your drag name? I'm like, there's at least 20 other podcasts and interviews that have that question.
Because it's so bored of answering the same question.
It's the same drag. It's the same drag questions. Like, what are your inspirations? You know, it's very that.
Why black?
Why black? Oh God, why black? Yeah.
But, you know, that's like media. It just shows that media is only fascinated with like the certain like hot topics or the same stuff over and over. I think, and in our LGBTQ media, we're not asking smart questions. We're not doing our research. We're just affixing to these little like buzzwords.
Sound bites.
Yeah, and it's like, well, that's not all that we are. We're not, because like you said, we know that information already, or that's not.
Well, I think like once you become something, you get typecast as it.
Yeah.
Where people almost get mad at you if you dare answer anything or step outside of that realm. So like, do you feel like you're also now typecast? Like you can only do like dark and spooky, that you're not allowed to do anything like happy or bubbly?
Ooh, you know what's funny? I think it's actually the opposite because I'm very particular about what I do and how I do it. And a lot of different shows will be like, oh, we're doing the show. Can you do this, but do it like this way? And I'll be like, no, I'm not, you know? So I actually feel like it's the opposite. I feel like I do what I do and I love doing it the way I do it. And oftentimes other people expect me to bend to their shows or their film or their whatever project it is. And I don't, because usually I end up being unsatisfied with the end product because it looks like this bastardized version of whatever I was trying to make, you know?
You did a scene for American Horror Story, didn't you?
Oh, I did promo. So
Yeah.
I didn't get to do a scene, but I it's funny. It was so much work and I'm in it for like half a second.
I've heard that from everybody that's been in the promos, because you know the promos now lately have been 1,000 times better than the actual show,
Yes.
and it's very artistic.
Yeah, you know it's funny? I bless them, but I remember they were doing all these shenanigans to get my shot, and then I saw the shot and I was like, you could have done this and spent a quarter of the money. So basically they wanted this shot of me hanging upside down like 30 or 40 feet in the air and getting swung into the camera upside down. So it was it was like 6 hours of like makeup, like full body makeup and costuming and all this crap. And then a whole day of like rehearsals with the harness and getting the harnesses fitted and the wire work and all this stuff, and having a team of stunt people professionally doing all the rigging and everything. It was just so much work. And then the day of the shoot, we shot it like, I want to say we shot it like maybe 20 to 30 times of me upside down swinging into the camera. It was so much work. And then when I saw this shot, it literally looks like I just like step into it. And I was like, you literally could have shot this on the ground with me running towards the camera, which was unfortunate. And I think that's why they only used like a half second of it, because it didn't quite read like I was flying into the camera. But it was a lot of fun. I will say that. I was not mad about, getting to fly for a day. That was a lot of fun.
I mean, I'd be scared doing that.
Oh, it's so much fun.
But also
I
be part
love
of that
flying.
franchise
Yeah.
too. I mean, just to step your foot. Well, not this last season or the short episodes, but anyway.
But that one good season.
Yeah.
The beginning.
Can you believe that that's our time again? It just keeps happening. We just need to have like a 24/7 telethon
Right, just
show.
keep shuttling our friends. Thank you for coming in, by the way. I'm so
Thank
happy
you so
did.
much for having me. This was fun. Thank you for asking interesting questions.
Vander, where do you want people to find you and follow you?
They can find me. All my socials are at Vander Von Odd, so they can find me on Twitter, Instagram, my website vandervonodd.com, where they can also find prints and artwork and all kinds of stuff that I'm selling. And that's about it. Oh, and nightgowns. Watch Nightgowns on Roku. Sasha Velour's Nightgowns. It's a, I think, 10-part episode miniseries that we shot about the process of like putting together nightgowns, which is one of my favorite shows to do.
It is really good. You should check it out.
I'm writing that down right now.
Yeah, it's free on Roku, the Roku channel.
All right, and I am Teddy Bear. You can find me on Instagram at Mr. Teddy Bear Gurrrl or on Twitter at the XXX Teddy Bear.
Woo. I don't have any triple X's in mine, I'll tell you that much. Someday I wish. I'm Alexander. You can find me on Instagram at AlexanderIsOnAir. And that's another episode.
Yeah. Embrace the fur and stay hairy.
Rawr!
Drags.
That has been another episode of Bear With Us, Girl, presented by Bear World Magazine and Cybersocket.com.
Please take a moment to like, subscribe, comment, rate, all the love and support you can give, guys.
Questions, comments, and suggestions? Email us at bearwithusgirl, 3 R's, @gmail.com.
Until next time, embrace the fur.
Grrr.